Go. Well, welcome to the channel. I'm Randy Broussard, your host. I have a very special guest with me today, Mr. Gary Severson. Gary's a historian, researcher, retired history teacher at appropriately John F. Kennedy High School in Minnesota. Has his own blog, 3 Shots at Life. He conducts many fascinating interviews regarding the assassination. He's written forwards to books, including Lee Harvey Oswald, Lyndon Johnson, and the JFK assassination by John DeLay Williams. Explores the life of Lee Harvey Oswald, painting him as an actual real person. We're going to get into that in a minute. Gary's extensive research regarding the assassination has taken him on many long and winding roads. And like not many of your average researcher would probably pursue. His experience actually dates back when he was in high school. He and a friend breached the security at a Kennedy speech in North Dakota, where he walked past security right under the nose of the Secret Service, unimpeded, and may have been privy to a major event involving a plot 2 months before the assassination in September of '63. So he was pretty much ahead of the game then. Since then, he's been relentless in his pursuit of the truth of what happened on November 22nd, 1963. Besides facing obstacles, non-responsive witnesses, he stayed the course. He's been successful in providing valuable information concerning the conspiracy. His research has not only uncovered Oswald's mysterious ties to New Orleans, which hits home to me, but also to his own native North Dakota and Stanley specifically. Witnesses claim Oswald lived in the summers of '54 and '56, where many believe that these cities, along with Dallas, shared some common elements involving this sinister plot to frame Oswald as a lone gunman. I want to talk about all these interesting research that Gary has done and others. So stay tuned. And Gary, thank you so much.
Well, that was great. I don't know where, I assume you composed that pretty much. That's very good. I appreciate it.
Oh, thank you so much. I have my moments anyway. I want to first start off by asking you, like I ask a lot of the researchers, how did you get started besides, and I certainly want to hear about you and your friend, getting close to Kennedy and breaching the security back in September of '63. How did you get interested in the assassination? And give me a little bit about your background, perhaps. So.
Yeah, well, like you've mentioned, I'm from North Dakota. I grew up on the North Dakota-Minnesota border, but an hour south of the Canadian border, 2 hours south of Winnipeg, which is a city people would recognize. And when I was 16 and saw the Kennedy speech, at that point, it's not like I started to do research at that point. There are people that did. I know one guy that lived on the same street as I did that started doing research after seeing Kennedy at the same event when he was 12. And so for whatever reason, I did not start researching then. But in the late '60s, let's say 4 or 5 years after I saw Kennedy in person, the universities all over the country started being visited by researchers. Mark Lane, for example.
Okay.
And I started paying attention when I'd go to the talks by these guys, and gradually it morphed into a big interest. And I think it was 1975, actually 10 years later, I had been starting to pay, like I say, pay quite a bit of attention to things in the media. We didn't have YouTube then, so it wasn't like it was coming from every direction in terms of theories about the assassination, but there was enough. And I took my first teaching job in Southwest Minnesota in '75, and my wife was pregnant with our first son, and I came home, and she threw Mark Lane's book at me. She says, "You got to read this." So she was very much a instigator in this
Mhm.
lifelong activity, and still sticks with me and backs me up. And she's heard it all, so I forget sometimes when I'm telling her the same story over again. But but so it really, the late 60s is when I really started to try to figure out why my buddy and I got through those unlocked doors with no security.
Nothing
And
has changed. This is,
yeah, and one thing led to another, and
yeah.
I found people who um, had information from that day that started to fit into a puzzle that made sense. And of course, I branched out into lots of other areas after reading other books that had nothing to do with my experience.
Mhm.
And I guess every day I do research, because once you, as you know, once you get connected to various internet sites, there's messages coming from them every day. So it's almost like you can't avoid it, you
Right.
know? And you start interacting with various researchers. So I've been doing that since at least 2000, because of course the internet wasn't quite the connection that it was, that it began to be in say around 2020 or so, or I mean 2000 I should say.
Right.
And so anyway, that's kind of the background of how I got going, and I'm sure I'll be doing it. I'm 77. I hope to be able to be coherent enough to keep doing it for a long time.
Good. We hope so. And I know you had made a presentation, I think it was a history conference that you presented with maybe other former professor of yours, and I think you were going to stay for his speech. And can we talk about that? He may have been connected to the CIA and
Yeah, that I wake up every day thinking about how I'm going to approach him.
Mhm. And who was
Again,
he? And explain briefly who he was.
yeah, there was a history conference dealing with, well, the title was uh, Crimes on the Great Plains, something like that. And I thought, well, if an assassination had happened that the day that I saw Kennedy in 63, we would have had a big crime, obviously. So they accepted my proposal. And I saw on the program that my ex-professor from the University of North Dakota uh, was also presenting. So the long and short of it is, I showed up before either of us had presented at Augustana University in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. And this was their 55th annual conference for this particular genre of Western research. It was actually called the Western Studies Center. And I walked into his presentation and I said, I'll stay for yours if you come to mine in an hour or so. He
Mhm.
said, well, he didn't seem surprised at all that I was even there. I introduced myself as a former student, hadn't taken a lot of courses from him, but um, he's 90, or is he 89? But anyway, he didn't retire until he was 87, the longest tenured professor in North Dakota. And he continues to live just a few blocks from where I grew up. And but over the years, I was told by his colleagues that when the three of them graduated from the University of Oklahoma with their PhDs, uh, they were all approached by the CIA. And one of the professors said, uh, Dr. So-and-so accepted, I didn't. And I didn't find that out until after I was his student. So I just knew he was very, very conservative. And then I found out that the CIA did kind of focus at times on the University of Oklahoma for recruits. And so that fit. Well, anyway, I sat through his talk in Sioux Falls. This is a year and a half ago now. And I noticed another professor in the back of the room who I had attended her lecture maybe the day before. And I knew she was from North Dakota. So that's fine. You know, I didn't think that she was there running interference for him or anything. But after my lecture, I went downstairs and there was a break. And I walked up to the two of them and I said, Doctor, I'll call him Dr. E. And I said, so were you at UND in 63 when Kennedy gave his speech? Now I'm thinking I'm talking to a CIA asset, not necessarily an agent, but an informant or whatever on a university campus. And remember, the university, not remember, you wouldn't know this, but the University of North Dakota was located right next or a few miles from a nuclear base. So there were reasons in a town of 50,000 to have CIA assets observing both the university and the nuclear air base and so on. So all of a sudden, the woman professor sitting next to him, when I asked the question, were you at Kennedy's speech in 63? She says, oh no, he wasn't there yet. And I said, well, you got there in 62. And they didn't expect me. I mean, he's right in the program in his bio that he had gotten to North Dakota in 62.
Right.
At that moment, there was an announcement to have an award ceremony. So they got out of my grip there. I was about ready to go for the jugular, see what else I could get out of him. But he did say, before that announcement came, he said, you know, when Dr. Penn, who has passed away, I'll use his actual name, when his son committed suicide in 2003, I became very close to him. Well, I didn't have any idea about that, but it told me that they must have had a discussion about me because the Dr. Penn had spent a few hours with me on 3 or 4 different occasions answering questions I had about the assassination, because he was in charge of security, at least for the university. He was the liaison between the White House and the university to get Kennedy to come and accept an honorary degree. And
Right.
so there was Dr. E going along with his colleague saying that he wasn't there in 63. And I say, but you were there in 62. Now, it's a little strange that everybody remembers where they were. He was a history prof. You'd think a president comes to campus, you'd be there. You know, I mean, there might be a reason you wouldn't be, but chances are you would be. So this is an ongoing development because a woman who was a sister of the guy that I walked through the doors with at this Kennedy speech, I talked to her about 6 months ago after my friend passed away down in Wichita Falls, in fact. And I told her the part about how Dr. E had mentioned that he had become very close to Dr. Penn when his son committed suicide in 03. And without too much hesitation, she said, well, Dr. E was threatening you. Okay, why would you think that? Well, her father was the state petroleum engineer who lived next door to me, who told me in 67 that LBJ did it. Well, the reason he said that is because he was a friend of H.L. Hunt, because H.L. Hunt would have to go to the State Geological Survey in Grand Forks at the university in order to get the paperwork done to be able to drill for oil. And the state petroleum engineer, this woman's father, the first thing I'm going to ask her pretty soon is, the fact that you said that he was threatening me tells me that you know something about his relationship to your father. And, am I right? Did you hear things between your father and Dr. Penn? And they were both John Birch Society members. So the ultra right attitude was alive and well in their world, So anyway, I guess I should leave it at that for now as far as that story. It goes on. There's other details. I guess the one thing I would say before leaving it is that Dr. Penn, in a story in the Grand Forks paper in I guess it could have been 2003. He said the funniest thing that happened during Kennedy's visit was I was in the other end of the arena that's got 15,000 people in it. There's another 30,000 outside. Kennedy had to take a limousine about a block from his helicopter outside the football stadium. And the Dr. Penn, who was the liaison for security, got a call saying, you forgot to give credentials to the president of the university so he could escort Kennedy in to the stage. He said, I raced across the arena, and at that rate, Kennedy had been standing next to his limousine in the open for, let's say, at least 10 minutes. And there were perches on the football stadium. In fact, there were sharpshooters on the roof of this arena that I saw. Now, were they Secret Service or were they posing? These doors that we went through were open. It was like somebody used those open doors to get on the roof, obviously. And at any rate, it makes Dr. Penn more suspicious, because when I finally tried to interview him a fourth time, he said, come into my apartment, which was just off campus in 2003. And I knocked on the door, he opens it up, and there's two dining room chairs sitting right next to the apartment door. And they were clearly out of place. They should have been around the dining room table. So I step in and he says, sit down. And, at this point, he's thinking that I wouldn't have come back after the first time where we met in a restaurant. But now I'm coming back a fourth time, and he's getting jumpy or something. He leans over and sits down next to me, leans over and looks me in the face and says, you don't think I was involved, do you? Well, if I'd been a professional investigative reporter, I might have been able to say something that wouldn't have just cut it off. But I said, oh no, Dr. Penn, I don't think that. I was so taken aback that, but
why would he ask that question?
Yeah. So he passed away, I don't know, 2010, but he wouldn't talk to me after that. So
they're suspicious.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned, I know earlier in previous interviews about how you have linked Lee Harvey when Oswald. I want to talk about Oswald And this hits home to me when he was in New Orleans. You've been to New Orleans several times. And I know you've done lots of research of where Oswald hung out, who he spoke to. Can you share that with us?
Sure. First time I was there was 1986, and I was at a teachers convention at the Superdome. Excuse me. And I was standing in front of the Marriott right on Canal. I guess it's still there.
Mhm.
And I brought the book by Henry Hurt called what was it? Plausible Denial, or at any rate, I'm standing and I'm looking across the street and I see these window door frames, and they look familiar compared to a picture in the book that he wrote. So I run upstairs and get the book. Actually, I thought I had it with me. I get upstairs and I don't. Coincidentally, when I go back downstairs, I see a bookstore, I think a chain type, across the street. And I walk over and here's copies in the window for $2 a piece. So I buy two. I match a picture in the book to what I'm seeing across the street, and it seems to be where Oswald was, at least on one occasion, passing out free play for Cuba literature. And so I look in the index and I find Adrian Alba's address, his parking garage, I suppose 3-4 blocks south of Canal,
Right.
next to the Riley Coffee Company. So I go there and there's actually a little office, and he isn't there, but his son is. I said, would you give this book to your dad? He's got a part of a chapter in that book. I'm sure he'd be interested in seeing what somebody said about it. Well, he proceeded to tell me a lot of stuff about what he had heard from his dad. And when I got back to Minnesota, I called him up on a couple of occasions to talk about what his experience was. And of course, it was, well, backing up a little bit, the office Adrian Alba had preserved as it was in 1963, when Oswald would come next door from Riley Coffee Company and sit and have a pop and read gun magazines. And Adrian Alba had such a sense of history, I guess, that he told me the pop machine is the same, the chairs are the same, the desk, everything about the room is the same. So when you go, at least the last time I was there, it's been 4 years, that office is boarded up as if it's being saved as a historic site. The parking ramp that he owned has been torn down, and there's actually quite a big, almost office-like looking building, which is actually largely a parking ramp for the surrounding. Well, at any rate, what Adrian Alba told me was that Oswald wanted him to sight the rifle in. And he said, no matter what I did, I couldn't get that scope straight on the barrel. He couldn't hit the broadside of a barn with that Mannlicher car cannon. And he said, I even took two belts and riveted them together and attached to the barrel and the butt so you could wrap your forearm around the strap to stabilize your movement. And he said when they handed that gun to me on the when the Warren Commission, I don't know if he was actually called to Washington or if they came to him, but he said, yeah, they handed the gun to me, and I knew it was the same gun. I could see certain details that I was familiar with, and he also said that on one occasion Oswald was going back to Riley Coffee next door, and as you probably know, I mean, this is on the other side of Canal from the French Quarter, but there's still a lot of narrow streets. And he said this green or chartreuse Studebaker pulled up next to Oswald very slowly, stopped, and I could see that Oswald leaned over, and whoever was in the car handed him an envelope that he just in one motion stuck under his t-shirt and continued on to Riley. He said, the thing is, I knew the car. The car was one of federal intelligence of some sort that parked their cars in my parking ramp.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's pretty provocative right there to
Right.
put those two things together. So,
Mm-hmm.
um,
Oswald's no ordinary citizen.
no.
Now, did you also view Oswald's rooming house where he
Yeah.
lived on Magazine Street, I think it was.
Right. 4703 or something.
Yeah, something like that.
And now it's confusing because, I mean, I was there when it was still inhabited by a lady who grew up behind on the street just behind it, but her backyard abutted the shotgun house that Oswald was staying in. And she said that she saw him numerous times. Once she said he came out to the garbage in a trench coat and seemed to be putting some of his garbage in somebody else's garbage can. But
Or could something more sinister, who knows?
yeah. So anyway, this was let's say 2010, and the lady was very, very interested in the fact that we were trying to get some perspective on the house that Oswald had lived in. She invited us in. She gave us a tour, my son and my wife, and now there were two basically one-room apartments in the front of the shotgun house. So there were actually three addresses, and the story is Oswald lived in the more expansive back one,
Right.
but got his mail in the front one at a different address. And then she also added, and I don't know if this is true because you can't see it now, but she said there was a false wall running along one side of the shotgun house that was like a passageway from front to back. And I now, as of, I don't know, 8 years ago, it's occupied by a law firm.
I saw that. Yeah, Pastor. Have
Yeah.
you talked to those lawyers, or you talked to some?
Yeah, I did.
What
And
did they tell you?
one of them
Go ahead.
in person, the other by phone. And the one I didn't talk to was more interested than the other lawyer, but because he was getting pictures framed of the front of newspapers the day of the assassination and so on. And he was putting those in his office. And I don't know about the waiting area, but they both said, they wanted to preserve the floor plan. They appreciated what the building meant, but it might get torn down for one thing if they didn't remodel it and occupy it. So I think I talked to him again the next time I was there, but at one point they said no, there was no false passageway on that one side of the house that we discovered. And he said then the city said that if we wanted to, we could pick our own address. So we picked an address that was different than when Oswald lived there, because naturally they're trying to keep tourists away as much as possible, And but after she moved out, I was there again with my wife and son again, and we started to walk up the driveway because the entrance to where Oswald lived was on the side of the house because of these two front rooms that were separate apartments or single rooms. And this voice said, "Do not come any further." and whoever was occupying it had a camera set up because he didn't want people bugging him, you know.
Right.
So we backed off, and it was after that that the lawyers bought it and refurbished it into a law office.
Well, like you said, they want to keep tourists away. I can understand, but can anybody go in and just look at these pictures in that hall, or
Well, I think you could, because there's a receptionist in the front
yeah,
seating area, and if you ask nice and so on, I mean,
oh,
because the address is off now, it's probably cut back on the number
yeah,
of people wandering in. But and of course, the new address would be matched to a law firm on Magazine Street, so you know you could find it. You could
yeah,
find a way to get in there, and if the lawyer happened to be there that was interested, that's got the pictures on the walls and so on, he would probably be interested.
right.
So
Gary, we only have about 5 minutes left. Time went by so fast. If you could briefly just tell us a little bit about Oswald's alleged time he spent in North Dakota, and what do you think were the ties there, the assassinations, as quickly as you can, if possible.
yeah. Well, John Armstrong is pretty well known now because of his book Harvey and Lee, and I was standing in the Minneapolis bookstore, magazine store, back in probably 98.
Mhm.
And there was a copy of Dallas Monthly for sale, and it had Mrs. Connolly on the cover.
Mhm.
And the title was Does Texas Still Care?
Yeah.
Kennedy. And I bought it, saw John Armstrong's reference to North Dakota, and called him up, and he says, well, you're up there, you see what you can find out. So
Right.
I and another professor from North Dakota, who I only met in about 1999, we went out there, and fast forward, in last November 22nd, everybody's heard of the city of Fargo. Well, Fargo is also a movie, right?
Yeah, I've seen
That's
it.
why they've heard of it. And they called me on about November 15th last year and said, we want to do a story on what you have to say about Oswald in North Dakota. So they ended up doing a front page, fully fleshed out story that continued on page 7, another full page. And I couldn't believe it. I mean, here we were 60 years later,
Yeah.
and North Dakota and Oswald were still a thing, in terms of they thought that they had dismissed it in 1963 by some investigative reporters trying to find out if it was true then, and they were convinced it wasn't true. But they didn't talk to the people I talked to by going there, and
Now,
it opened up a whole can of
right.
worms.
Do you think
And,
this was a plot to maybe frame him, to place him there? You think it was true?
well,
We have about 2
people,
minutes, and I'm sorry.
yeah, the people that I interviewed there were really uptight. Either when I got to them, if they had moved to the West Coast or whatever, but I told Peter Dale Scott the story, and he says, well, you know, maybe the people that you found there weren't actual witnesses, but were put up to it
Right.
in order to frame Oswald.
Right. I really appreciate it. I'm sorry I have to cut you off. Thank you so much. How do people find you, Gary?
Well, it actually, you know, I'm not, I got off Facebook 5 years ago. I still go to, it's open. I still go to Facebook.
That's where I found you.
Yeah, yeah. But if you just type Gary Severson, Oswald, stuff
Okay.
comes up.
Great.
That's the easiest.
Once again, great meeting you. I really appreciate it. Hope we can talk soon again.
Okay, thanks, Randy. Appreciate it.